Good morning. If you have your Bible or your phone, I want you to go to 1 Samuel 16. 1 Samuel 16, back in the Old Testament. For the last few weeks, we've been in this series that we've called Chasing Mirages. And when we started, we defined a mirage as an image produced by very hot air of something that seems to be far away but does not really exist. Or another way you can define it is a mirage is a hope or wish that has no chance of being achieved. Another way to think about it is that a mirage is something, as we've defined it, that you think you need to be happy, that you think you need to have in order to feel fulfilled. So you pursue that thing, but no matter how hard you pursue it, it always feels as if it's just out of reach. It's around the next corner. It's over the next horizon. It's never quite in your grasp. But today we're going to talk about one final mirage that in many ways is one that we've created. You could say it's a mirage of our own making. If you go back through history, it's always been a problem, but researchers tell us in the last 10 to 15 years, it's evolved into a full-blown crisis. And just so you know, I'm not overstating the case. I took a screenshot of an article that was in USA Today just 9 days ago. The headline reads, "The Kardashians' Body Image and Social Media. Why Parents Should Stop Filtering Their Photos." Let me read you just the opening paragraph from that article. "Filtered photos fill our social media feeds regularly. A wrinkle erased, a red eye fixed, an arm slimmed down. People are doing more than just tweaks to their photos, twisting and contorting their faces and bodies so that they look practically unrecognizable. All to fit an ever-changing ideal body shape that jumps from favoring skinny to curvy and back again." It goes on. "Celebrities like Kim and Khloe Kardashian get accused of such fixes all the time, and many people are guilty of this. But mental health professionals say parents in particular need to be aware of what they post on social media because children observe much more than we think." The article goes on to talk about how an entire generation made up of your kids and my kids and your grandkids are internalizing all of these unspoken messages about how they have to look in order to be accepted by the society around them. One spokesman for the American Psychological Association said it's precisely that kind of social comparison and what they call the never-ending pursuit of more likes and more followers that's leading to increased instances of depression, eating disorders, addictions, and even an increased risk of suicide that is unlike anything our culture has ever seen. Now, if you're a person who uses social media, then you know that while this is a huge problem for the next generation, it's not limited only to the next generation. This is a problem that affects members of every generation. From the late night infomercials that promise to help every man over age 65 feel and look 35 again if he'll just take whatever supplement they're selling, to the billion-dollar beauty industry. It tells women if they'll take this pill, follow this program, and use this cream, then they'll be eternally young and beautiful. And all the while, the message that's being sort of shot in the background is that in and of yourself, you're not pretty enough, you're not skinny enough, you're not young enough, or tall enough, or in shape enough, or fashionable enough to warrant any attention. So if you want to get noticed by the people around you, you want to be accepted by the people around you, you're going to have to change who you are. And so, in an effort to gain acceptance, that's what we do. We buy new clothes, we go to the gym, we change our hairstyle. Sometimes we even have some kind of surgery, not just an attempt to change how we look, but in many ways an attempt to change who we are. And if that doesn't work, you can always use the filters on Instagram to alter your appearance so that when you put that picture up, it might look kind of like you, but it's not really you. But it's okay because you're going to get some likes and some followers. couple years ago, there was a popular columnist in the New York Times who described what it's like to look in the mirror after you hit 40. Here's what she said. More than 40 years of looking in a mirror, like many women I know, has left me almost totally ignorant of what I really look like. In the mirror, I do not see reality. I see a composite of memories, experiences, wishes, half-truths, and old pictures of myself. She then described what it was like to spend several $1,000s on a makeover only to come home to have her 7-year-old son run out the door screaming because he no longer recognized his mother. In an attempt of trying to be somebody else, she lost sight of who she was. Do you think it's possible that at least for some of us, this obsession with how we look and trying to be beautiful has caused us to lose sight of who we really are? Or do you think it's possible that when God looks at you, the person that he sees is different than the person you see when you look in the mirror? What you find in 1 Samuel 16 is the story of a kingdom that's in transition. Now, one of the ongoing stories over the last month or so has been the transition from Queen Elizabeth II to her son, King Charles III. Now, if you watch any of this, you know there was about a week there. Every time you turn on the TV, the question they were talking about is, what kind of king is Charles going to be? And the answer to that question is, he's going to be the kind of king that doesn't have any real power and takes a lot of pictures. Just so you know, that's the kind of the king that he's going to be. But the transition in 1 Samuel 16 is a lot different than that, because the king of Israel will have near absolute power. And to understand what's happening in chapter 16, you have to back up to chapter 8, because that's when members of the nation of Israel went to a prophet named Samuel, who was both a prophet, sort of the spiritual leader, and also kind of the chief justice of the Jewish nation. And they asked him to install a king that would then rule over them and rule over them into the future. Up until that point, they had functioned primarily as what's called a theocracy, which meant that God himself was their king. But because of what was happening around them, they wanted a human king. So they asked Samuel to help them establish a monarchy. And even though Samuel didn't agree with the plan, God gave him permission to move forward. So you get to chapter 9 of 1 Samuel, and Samuel anoints a man named Saul as the first king of Israel. Some of you know his story. And one of the first things the Bible tells us about Saul is that he was a very impressive physical figure. Here's the way he's described in 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 23. It says, they ran and brought him out, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Samuel said to all the people, do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people. Then the people shouted, long live the king. Now, if you know his story, then you know in the first part of his reign, he proved to be a pretty effective king. But then, like a lot of political leaders, over time, the power went to his head, and somewhere along the line, his ego took over, which is just another clear indication that tall people can't be trusted. And don't get mad at me. That's in the Bible. That's exactly what it says. The result is that by the time you get to 1 Samuel 16, God's decided to remove Saul from the throne, and he's going to replace him with a new king. And that's where we pick up the story in 1 Samuel 16, verse 1. Here's what it says. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. But Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me. Now, some of you might be familiar with the saying, if you come at the king, you best not miss. And that's kind of what Samuel's thinking. I want to do what the Lord wants me to do, but if Saul finds out about this, he's going to chop my head off. But in spite of his fear, he pushes through that and he goes to Bethlehem to look for the new king. Second part of verse 2. The Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled. When they met him, they asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. It's interesting, by this point in Saul's reign, the instability in his life had permeated throughout the whole kingdom. Sometimes you see that. Political leaders go off the rail and it just affects everybody. And it got so bad that the elders of the town trembled at the sight of Samuel, because as soon as they saw him, they knew that something big was about to happen. Now, you get to verse 6, Samuel has found Jesse, this guy, and all that God's told him, say, you go find Jesse, and one of his sons is going to be the new king. But he doesn't identify which one it's going to be. So he comes to Jesse, and the first son he sees is Jesse's oldest son, a guy named Eliab. And as soon as he sees him, he thinks, that's the guy I've been looking for. Check out verse 6. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. Now, why is it that as soon as he saw him, he thought, that's the next king? It's because from Samuel's perspective, Eliab looked the part. See, to Samuel, one of the requirements of being a king is that you first have to look like a king. And you know how that works, because in our culture, we see it all the time. Whenever somebody's running for national office and they turn in their campaign finance reports at the end, buried deep in there somewhere, there will be a whole army of image consultants, personal trainers, hairstylists, makeup artists, and even wardrobe specialists whose only real contribution to the campaign is to make sure that their candidate looks like somebody that should be in the position that they're running for. And a lot of times what you'll find is somebody can be completely unqualified for the job, and yet they get elected because they look like somebody that should have that job. Now you get to verse 7. It's really the key verse to the whole passage, because when you get to verse 7, God steps back into the story and he corrects Samuel for making a mistake that all of us make all the time. I mean, this is the kind of mistake, it's so natural to us. We do this without even thinking about it. It's like it's become second nature to us, so much so that we no longer even recognize it as a mistake. But check out what God says, verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Now, if you're keeping track, here's the key thing from the message today. People look at the outside. God looks at the inside. People look at the outside. God looks at the inside. And you know that's true because you do that. And so do I. Just think about this story. Here's Samuel. He's the chief spiritual leader of the nation. He's a prophet sent by God for the incredibly important mission of finding and identifying the next king of Israel. And even Samuel misjudges this thing on the basis of nothing more than appearances. And so God interrupts him. He says, hey man, you should know better than that. And we should too. But most of the time, we don't. Most of the time, we fall into the trap of evaluating the people around us based on nothing more than the externals, the outside, how they look, what they wear, what kind of shape they're in, how they cut their hair, how tall they are, how skinny they are. And those become the things that we evaluate other people on. It's like we've got this list that's buried somewhere deep in the back of our minds that we use to evaluate the people around us. And as bad as that is, and that's terrible, but as bad as that is, there's something that's even more destructive than that. So it's one thing if I begin to evaluate everybody around me based on these externals. That's bad. But what's worse than that is when I start to evaluate myself based on these externals. It's one thing to look at you and make judgments about you. It's something worse to make judgments about myself. And so here's what we do. Because we know that people look at the outside, that becomes the thing that we obsess over. Let me give you some examples of how this happens. Whenever you start to obsess over the outside at the expense of the inside, you'll start to do things like this. You'll spend more time fixing your hair than you do reading your Bible. Anybody guilty of that? Anybody ever get up in the morning and the first thing you think about is what you're going to wear and how you're going to do your hair and not how you're going to serve the people around you? Same time, when you find yourself obsessing over the outside at the expense of the inside, you'll find yourself spending more time at the gym and in the tanning bed working on your body than you do cultivating the condition of your heart. You'll find yourself spending more money on outfits and shoes and gym memberships and workout equipment and all kinds of other stuff that's meant to make the outside look better than you do sharing or giving to people who really need it. I don't know if you notice this or not, but we'll even do it on a Sunday. How many times have you got up in your life, gotten up early, you get ready for church, you put on some clothes, and then right before you walk out the door, you decide, you know what, I need to change outfits. Maybe 2 or 3 more times before you ever get to church. How many times have you ever driven to church, trying to do your makeup, trying to make sure your hair's in place, and you walk in and you haven't prayed even 1 second? That's what we do. But it's okay, because when it's over, you can post a perfectly filtered picture on Instagram about what a great service it was, and people will click on it and like your picture. One of the things the Bible makes clear over and over and over again is that the outside of something can be pretty impressive, while at the exact same time, the inside can be incredibly messed up. But what if it wasn't that way? One of the things that's happening in this passage is that God is trying to teach Samuel something that a lot of us need to be reminded of, and that's that real beauty goes a lot deeper than just skin deep. You might call it unfiltered beauty. And if you look at this passage, there are 3 things that God reminds Samuel of. And here's the first one. It's that real beauty, unfiltered beauty, is internal, not external. It's a matter of what's going on inside, not a matter of how it looks on the outside. So I've got a picture I want to show you. This screenshot was taken from one of the most incredible videos I've ever seen. It was released in April of this past year, earlier this year, by the Dove Company, the people that make all the soaps and lotions and all that. It was part of what they called their Detox Your Feed campaign, talking about social media. And in the video, you can see this girl, they brought in these 3 different girls, ages, I think they were 10 to 13, and they would sit there with their moms, and they would talk about a very raw conversation about some of the beauty advice that these girls were reading on social media. At the same time those conversations were taking place, behind the scenes, they had a little group of content creators who were using what's called facial mapping technology. And what they were doing within just a couple minutes, they produced what are called these deep fake videos. And maybe you've read about these online, artificial intelligence stuff. So the girls would hit the play button on this video, and up on this enormous screen would be a video of their mom, or what looked like their mom, giving them beauty advice. Now, all of it was fake, but if you watch the video, you'll see what I'm talking about. You couldn't tell it was fake. And to make it more dramatic, their mothers were reading to them and giving them advice that was taken directly from their social media feeds. I want you to read, I hope you'll watch it later, but let me just read you a sampling of the things that were said. Keep telling yourself you're not hungry, you're thirsty. Fake eyelashes are so easy to glue on if you cut your eyelashes off. If your teeth are uneven, remember, you can always file them down with a nail file. Then there was this one. Remember, skinny is never finished. Now keep in mind, these are 10 and 13-year-old girls seeing a video of their own moms saying these things to them. Now you can see the picture of the mom. She's horrified, the shocked face. And then right at the end of the video, as the camera zooms in on the shocked moms and the horrified girls, there's the narrator comes in and says, "You wouldn't say that to your daughter, but she still hears it online all day, every day. Every day. The video by then closed by moms and daughters embracing and having these pretty serious conversations. Now you hear that, you hope you go home and watch it, and you say, how did we get to the point in our world where it's considered normal for random people on the internet to give beauty advice to 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old girls? It's because we live in a world that obsesses over the outside at the expense of the inside. That's exactly the kind of thinking that God is trying to correct in Samuel. So God says, hey, it's what's inside a person, meaning the condition of their heart, that's infinitely more important than whether or not their teeth are even and their eyelashes are the right length and how skinny they are. And see, that's a mistake that Samuel made when he first saw Eliab. He made a judgment call about who he was and what kind of king he might be based on nothing more than his external appearance. And God interrupts and says, wait a minute, Samuel, it's not his appearance. It's not his height that I'm worried about. It's the condition of his heart, because real beauty or unfiltered beauty is not external, it's internal. Now here's the second thing. Real beauty is permanent, not temporary. Now, why do you think it is that God looks at a person's heart rather than their personal appearance? The reason he does that is because as our creator, as the person who knit us together in our mother's womb, God knows that over time, a person's appearance is going to change. And sometimes it changes for the better, but this may make you mad, may hurt your feelings, but most of the time it changes for the worse. And you know how it works. Your weight starts to shift, your hair starts to change color, and if that's not bad enough, sometimes it starts to fall out. Wrinkles start to appear. And then at some point, rather than getting like taller and thinner, you start to get shorter and wider. If you don't believe me, you go home today, find a picture of yourself from 10 or 15 years ago, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And don't blame me, I'm just the messenger. Proverbs 31. Solomon, who just happened to be the son of King David, said it like this. He said, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And he singles out women, but the principle is the same. That phrase, beauty is fleeting. The word fleeting in Hebrew actually means vapor or breath. And he compares your physical appearance, your beauty, however impressive you are, to like your breath on a cool fall morning. You come out and you breathe out and you see your breath for just a split second, and then it's gone. That works the same way with beauty. 1 minute you're young and attractive, the next minute you're older and less attractive. That's why throughout Scripture, the biblical writers emphasize the condition of a person's heart, far and above how they look on the outside. So you go back to 1 Samuel 13. That's when the prophet Samuel confronted King Saul, and he tells him he's going to be removed from the throne. Now, you talk about awkward conversation. That had to be pretty awkward for Samuel. But then right at the end of that conversation, Samuel says to Saul, he says, but now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command. So what kind of leader is God looking for the next king? Is it somebody who's tall, dark, and handsome and has a made-for-TV smile? No. Instead, he's looking for someone who has a heart that's directed toward him. And why is it? It's because all of the external stuff is temporary and the internal stuff is permanent. So you fast forward to 2 Corinthians 4, the Apostle Paul says it like this. He says, therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly or externally we are wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. Now right now, whether you want to admit it or not, we are all in the process of externally or outwardly wasting away. That's just how it works. But internally, there should be a part of us that rather than wasting away is continually being renewed. And according to the Bible, that's by far the most important part of who we are. Now here's the last thing. Unfiltered beauty can be developed but it can't be inherited, and it can't be purchased. I've got another picture I want to show you. This is Cameron Russell. Back in 2013, she delivered a TED Talk titled, "Looks Aren't Everything." And the reason that she was able to give that is because she's since 2003, she's been one of the most in-demand models in the world. She's appeared in hundreds of ads for companies like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Prada, Ralph Lauren, Victoria's Secret. Her TED Talk was viewed over 30 million times, making it one of the most popular lectures in history. And during the talk, it only lasts about 10 minutes if you want to Google it. She takes you behind the scenes of the modeling process. And she goes into great detail to explain how when you see one of those ads, what you're seeing is not really her. Instead, she describes it as an artificial construction created by a group of professional photographers, hairstylists, and makeup artists who go through this intense and elaborate post-production process to get everything just right. So in the end, while they use her name on the ads, it's not really her that you see. She then talked about how whenever she meets someone new, one of the questions they inevitably ask is, how did you become a model? And so over the years, she's answered that so many times, she's come up with sort of a standard answer. She always says, that's easy. The reason I became a model is because I won the genetic lottery. And to her credit, she understands the reason she's in demand is because right now, she represents what's considered beautiful, what's considered popular in our culture. Now, if she'd been born at a different time or in a different culture, it might have been different. But for right now, she's the kind of person that's considered beautiful. So if you're sitting here right now and you're wondering, why am I not a model? It's because you didn't win the genetic lottery, and neither did I. And so you can blame it. You can blame it on your parents, your grandparents, or whoever you want to blame it on. Or you can do what a lot of people in our culture do, and since you didn't inherit it, you can try and purchase it. For example, just 2 weeks ago, I saw an ad for a group called the International Center for Limb Lengthening. Now, I know that sounds like it has to be made up. But I looked it up, and believe it or not, it's a real thing. And they were advertising what they call cosmetic height surgery. Now, I couldn't help but click on it. And I discovered for the small price of just around $70,000, these surgeons will go in, they will break your legs, they'll insert these rods at the end of your legs, and then sew them back together. And then after 3 or 4 days in the hospital, and after 8 to 9 months of physical therapy where you learn to walk again, after all that's over, you're guaranteed to be at least 2 and maybe 3 inches taller. And to be honest, I'm thinking about doing it. So if you want to donate, to Pastor Appreciation Month, I'll be out there. As the story in 1 Samuel 16 continues, one by one, Jesse's sons filter through, and it gets down to the point where Samuel says, it's none of these guys. And he turns to Jesse and he says, is there anybody else? Do you have any other people that we need to look at? Check this out, verse 8. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel, but Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? There is still the youngest, Jesse answered. He is tending the sheep. Samuel said, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for him, and he had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Now, the Hebrew word that gets translated as youngest in verse 11 can also mean smallest. So it's obvious from the way Jesse reacts is he never expected his youngest son or his smallest son, David, to be the one that Samuel was looking for. In fact, he was so far off the radar, he wasn't even initially invited to the party because his father is making the same mistake that Samuel made earlier. It's also interesting, you get to verse 12, Samuel goes out of his way to mention that even though David was the youngest or the smallest of Jesse's sons, he also had a fine appearance. Now, you can read that and you can say, well, that's a contradiction of what he just said in verse 7, because God had just said, hey, don't consider his appearance at all, and don't worry about how the potential king looks, and instead focus on the condition of his heart. And now just 5 verses later, he's once again noting the appearance of a potential king. So what's that all about? I think rather than being a contradiction, it's just an indication that while appearances are not unimportant, they're far from being the most important. So make sure you understand, there's nothing inherently wrong with trying to look your best. It's just that trying to look your best should never take priority over cultivating the condition of your heart. That's why I love verse 13, because when you get to verse 13, the Bible tells us that once Samuel identified David as the next king of Israel, he takes out a horn of oil and he anoints him. I want you to look at what happens. Verse 13. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. Now don't miss this part. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. Now here's something I don't want you to miss. From the moment that David was identified and anointed as the next king of Israel, it took 15 years before he ever actually sat on the throne. So from the moment this was not an overnight transition. This was a 15-year period of waiting. 15 years. Now, thankfully, he didn't have to wait as long as King Charles waited, but 15 years is a really long time. So what's happening in those 15 years? Not only is David getting physically stronger and more mature, at the same time, the Holy Spirit is working inside of him to transform his heart and turn him into the man that God wanted him to be. Why did it take so long? It took so long because God was doing something inside of David that was far more important than how David looked on the outside. From David's perspective, from God's perspective, the inside is a lot more important than the outside. Now, here's my question. Which one have you prioritized? As you look back over your life, which one has gotten the most attention? Have you spent more time developing the inside or obsessing over the outside? When you get up in the morning, what's the first thing you think about? Is it the inside or the outside? When you look in the mirror, what's the first thing you think about? Is it what's inside or what's outside? Samuel said it like this. He said, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. I want you to stand with me. As we close today, I want you to ask yourself this question. Have I been more concerned with the outside than I am with the inside? And if the answer to that question is yes, then I want to encourage you to change direction. Make a commitment that starting today, you're going to worry less about what the people around you might think and less about how you look and more about what God sees when he examines your heart. Because that's the only thing that's really going to matter. Nobody ever looks in a casket and says, boy, I'm glad they obsessed over how they looked. That's not what they talk about. They talk about what kind of person you were, what you gave, who you helped, who you shared your life with. And I know it's hard, man, when you live in a culture that obsesses over this stuff and you get online, it's all you see and every show is all about that. But I'm telling you, that is not what matters. Because all that stuff, man, is like your morning breath in the cold winter day. It's here and then it's gone. So if you're going to obsess over something, you need to obsess over the inside rather than the outside. If you want to pray with somebody, you want to talk to somebody, Dave and I will be here. We'd be glad to answer any questions, be glad to pray with you. If you're here and you say, well, I'm not sure what I should do, you can talk to us now. You can grab us after the service. We'd be honored to talk with you.